I know now that I wasn't being authentic at work because I didn't feel like I fully belonged. And so I think belonging, feeling like I belong is probably kind of a signal that I'm being authentic fully.
Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to unraveling the journey of being authentic in the workplace. I'm your host, Sandhya Sudhakar, and my guest today is Sam Parvin. Sam is the CEO and founder of Parvin Music, where she serves as a music supervisor for brands, helping them leverage music strategically to achieve their business goals. This ranges from licensing a song for an ad campaign to creating collaborations between musicians and brands to sourcing and producing custom work to help elevate a brand's voice and equity. In this episode, we talk about how she ended up pursuing a career at the intersection of music and marketing and how, as she built an independent business, she's been able to identify where and how her work can be most valuable. We also talk about how you can reframe energy management and productivity at work. And Sam and I dive deep into some of the unique ways to work smarter and not harder that we've used, both to better leverage your energy and to align the stuff that you have to do with when you're best suited to do it. I know you're going to walk away from this episode with some tips and tools that you're going to want to try yourself. So let's get into it. Okay, welcome, Sam, to Working Your Way. I'm really excited to have you on.
I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Sandhya.
Yeah. So before we get into all the career stuff, I'm curious, what are you listening to right now that you really love?
Oh my gosh, I'm all over the place. I am actually going to a recording session in 2 days for this amazing Mexican artist called La Bruja de Texcoco. She's amazing, has this very deep, sultry voice. I'm also listening to Olivia Rodrigo, who I love, just like some good pop stuff. Yeah, I'd say I'm all over the place, but those are the two that I've listened to in the last 24 hours.
I love it. I love it. I get into these phases where I just listen to the same thing over and over and over again and then move on to something else. And I don't know why those happen, but you
Me
probably
too,
know.
But it's great. Yeah. It's great to dive deep into something and just be in that ecosystem of one artist for a little while.
Yeah. So your work is so much about connecting people with music. It's about connecting brands with music that's going to represent their brand or transform their brand or connect with the consumer in a certain way. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit about what have been some of the major steps in your career that kind of led you to this place into starting your own agency and doing this work?
It's interesting, I think when I look back, sometimes I think that there was a moment where a major change happened, this one thing changed or this one thing happened or this one conversation, I met this one person and then my whole life changed because I got this big opportunity. But then I realized that, everything that I did up until that point also led me there, So I kind of always knew that I wanted to work in music, on the business side of music. When I was young, I was really into music and people would talk about how artists were rich and famous. Back then, there were some artists who were actually rich and famous. And I was like, how are they how do artists make money? How do musicians make money? I was just curious about that. And I think I'm kind of naturally entrepreneurial too. So I went and studied the business side of art in college. I worked at an amazing recording studio in Atlanta, Georgia, kind of my first real professional gig. And there I found the world of advertising and film and television as well. We did a lot of work in music, but we also did a lot of the audio for TV commercials and audiobooks and, radio commercials and things like that. And I remember having the thought, I was 24 probably, and just being like, what if I could bring together musicians with brands and help musicians get their music heard and help brands put cool music in their advertising? And I didn't know that being a music supervisor was a thing at that point, but I did kind of have that idea. And then I, gracefully just let it go and run in the background of my, to make a long story short, years later, I got an email, a LinkedIn message from somebody who I had never heard of. And I don't remember the whole email that he sent, but his last sentence was, if you don't currently have your dream job, then maybe we should just have a conversation. I'm like, well, yeah. And this was like 2011, and they had a really cool website, and it was like really well branded. And so I was like, yeah, let's have this conversation. I had this conversation with a team on my first interview was on a Sunday. I signed a contract on January 1st. And 2 weeks later, I was in Chicago, starting with what used to be the first, well, at the time was the first music licensing agency that was representing independent, real musicians, real songwriters, and getting their music placed in advertising and TV and film. And they hired me to manage the whole relationship with the Coca-Cola company in Atlanta and their headquarters. And so, yeah, I learned pretty much everything that I do now. Well, I mean, the foundation of what I do now all came from licensing music, composing original music, managing the royalties and the whole basically music ecosystem for the Coca-Cola company and their headquarters in Atlanta. And being there, I saw some opportunities to really work more closely with brands on how they can be using music as an asset or a tool, And so that's really what had me build my own company.
What do you think was the catalyst to that guy reaching out to you? Was it he knew someone who knew you, saw some work you were doing?
What they told me later is that they had another employee who they loved, and they wanted somebody else like him. And this guy is a dear friend of mine now and has his own amazing music agency. But they were like, we were just like putting in like keywords from this guy's LinkedIn profile into LinkedIn and like looking for somebody. And they thought, at the time I was living in Charleston, South Carolina, but they thought, I guess just because I had, a lot of my previous work and stuff was in Atlanta, they thought I was already living in Atlanta. They wanted to hire somebody in Atlanta to be there in the Coke headquarters. But yeah, he was like, we were literally just like plugging in like key phrases from this other guy's profile and we found you. But I think, again, I tell that story as if it's kind of this like, and then one day out of the blue, I just got this email, but like, I had studied the business of art. I had worked at a recording studio, so on the recording side of things, where we did both advertising and music, and then I was currently at that time working at a big international sales and marketing company, like a publicly traded, big company, which they wanted somebody who had that experience as well, since I was going to be working inside the headquarters of Coke, and so it was like I had everything that they were looking for. And so it wasn't a all of a sudden thing. I had been prepared for that,
Okay, this is a pretty cool story. I'm sure if you're looking for a job right now or you know someone who is, it might feel like this really foreign fantasy idea for someone to just message you out of the blue and offer you your dream job. But I think it's important to note that while we are in a tough job market right now, one, these things can happen. And two, it's about being visible in an authentic way and making yourself available for opportunities to come your way. Interestingly, when I left the CPG industry, it happened in kind of a similar way. A former colleague of mine messaged me out of the blue and asked how things were going in my current job. He and a few other former leaders from our old company, Procter and Gamble, had moved into a new industry, and they were looking for people that could help build new capabilities at this company and people that would do well in an environment without a lot of structure or direction or resources like budget. But the funny thing is, this was the exact thing that I had felt had kind of held me back in my corporate career at P&G. I didn't usually like following the massive amount of processes that we had. And I always kind of considered myself to be a little bit of a rebel. And he actually recognized this as a potential asset for this new team. And he reached out to me. Now, what he didn't know at the time was that the day before he sent me the message on LinkedIn, I had made the decision to quit that job that I was in without another job lined up and just take some time off. The day before I made this decision. And I love how the universe works sometimes. It was definitely a very serendipitous moment in my career, just like this one for Sam. And she wasn't looking for this specific opportunity, but she was visible in what she did enjoy and what she did really well. Both Sam and I had these opportunities come to us that were things that we didn't even really know to look for, didn't know existed. And I think the takeaway here is that we don't always need to know exactly what we want, but if we can be visible in the things that we are great at or the things that we love, it can create this foundation for the right opportunities to come our way. Okay, let's rejoin the conversation where Sam shares more about the work that she loves doing. I've had some conversations lately on the podcast, off of the podcast, about job searching and how difficult it is these days for a lot of people. A lot of hiring managers just don't want to take the risk, or they're too, they feel like they're too busy to possibly go outside of these very specific parameters of people. And so when they're hiring for someone who has already had that job title, has exactly this certain experience in this very narrow lane. And what I think is really cool about that story is that they started with the profile, the type of person that they wanted. And they're like, she'll figure out how to do this actual stuff, the bullet points, that needed to be done. But we want someone with this experience, with this kind of matrix of different knowledge and understanding.
Yeah. It's interesting. So mainly what I do is called music supervision. So it's supervising the entire music process. It's the legal piece of it. It's negotiating deals and structuring deals. It's the creative, of course, managing, getting music composed, etc. And until very recently, there was never a direct route to becoming a music supervisor. So I always love talking to my music supervisor friends about how they got into it, because we all got into it like this, and then we arrived at music supervision, and some people come from being artists first, and then they just started licensing their own music, or some people come from business. And so, there wasn't somebody who would have had the exact skill set that they were looking for back then, because it just didn't exist. That was in 2012 that they hired me, end of 2012. And so I totally understand in these, larger corporations, especially, that they want to mitigate risk, and they want to be have you already done this before? And so that I know that you can do it again. And, so much richness can be brought to a role when you have different experience, and could come at it from a creative way, and thinking about the position in a different way. So I don't envy hiring managers. Last year I had somebody working in my company for 6 months, and it was great for a long time. And then we realized after about 6 months that it just wasn't the right fit for both of us. And it took 6 months, for us to get there. So I don't envy those people.
It's really hard. And it's an investment either way, in terms of training people, filling whatever gaps, and also allowing them to do what they do. So,
well, and this is also why your work is so important, instead of just people quitting their jobs and having to hire new people. That's extremely costly in so many ways for companies of any size, that if we can find ways to have it work, because we become more aware of what we need and what our, employees need or our employers need, we can really, all enjoy our work more, but also cut down a lot on the cost of hiring and firing and all that.
Yeah, totally. It's eliminating some of the errors that happen in that process, where it's you think you want to do this, but you don't really want to do that, or you don't like it, or you think you should do it for a certain reason. And, ends up being a costly mistake, both for you and your time and for a company. But going into the Coca-Cola company, it's an iconic company with iconic brands. And at least from my kind of amateur perspective, one that's very tied to music, beverages especially. What was it like to go from what you had done before to doing this work now?
It was overwhelming. It was very exciting. I'm also from Atlanta, and so Coca-Cola's from Atlanta. When I worked at Coke, I lived right around the corner from the original pharmacy that was the first soda fountain. So it's kind of a part of my heritage, and my town's, my city's heritage as well. And music for Coca-Cola is just that was just the dream, right? So I was really excited to go in there, and I had only worked for 1 year at kind of a major corporation, but going into Coke, I was on a global team. I was with a lot, I worked with the best of the best marketers in the world. I mean, people go to work for Coca-Cola in their respective markets, but then people try and get people who work in the Coke system want to come to Atlanta to work in the headquarters, So I worked on a team with people from France and South Africa and Hungary and Mexico and Argentina, who had worked for 15 or 20 years in the Coca-Cola system and finally got this opportunity to come work on global projects in the headquarters. So it was a lot. It was so fabulous. The work that I did was just a total dream. I think for me and where I was personally at that time, I think I was like 29 years old, 28, 29. And it was tough for me to work in the big kind of corporate structure, like you need to talk to this person and you shouldn't really talk to the boss of that person, and you had to like sell in ideas. And, it was a really, I would say probably in general for like a major corporation, it was a rather healthy and collaborative atmosphere, but it was still a lot being with the best of the best and working on the biggest, projects in the world as far as marketing goes. So while I was so into the work I was doing, I also felt, I would say, a lack of belonging. And I was thinking about that, with the whole theme of your podcast of like authenticity at work and what does it mean to be authentic at work. And I think for me, I know now that I wasn't being authentic at work because I didn't feel like I fully belonged. And so I think feeling like I belong is probably kind of a signal that I'm being authentic fully, So, I mean, it's like, I love being an entrepreneur. I love having my own business and all of that. I love getting to focus on the work and not the extra stuff that comes along with working in a big corporation. But sometimes I'm like, gosh, being who I am now, 12 years later, 10 years later, I kind of wish I could do it over again just to see how I would be in that environment again, but I also don't.
Yeah. There is a confluence of like loving the work and probably for the first time or very early into your journey of like dealing with bureaucracy of a big company and
Yeah.
I can't just say this thing or I can't just talk to this person. Like, why are all these
Yeah.
rules here? And I know you to be someone who's a little bit of a free spirit. And so
Yeah.
I wonder if part of that was there's a little cognitive dissonance that was going on there.
Yeah, totally. I just think that we should all be able to talk to anybody within an organization, all that stuff. And I also get that when there's so many people involved, like there needs to be some order in organization, but
yeah.
And again, like my team and where I was, like it was a pretty open and a fairly healthy environment, it was just totally new for me at the time. And when I was still kind of figuring out who I am as a person,
As we talk about you doing your own thing, doing it independently, looking back on that chapter, what were a couple of things that you took away from that experience that have informed what you're doing now?
Well, I mean, kind of from a practical or technical perspective, I really try and work closely with my clients from early on and be like an extended team member. I saw how it's within the ecosystem of marketing or advertising, there's typically not one person who's in charge of music. And again, I mean, music has to do with creative and legal and deal structuring and negotiations and managing, the composing of original music and how does this fit with the brand, so like even like brand marketing type stuff. And so my mission has been, and I've turned down projects or I've, like kind of said no to things or, when I feel like music is not being where we're not going to be set up to win with music as a contributing factor to the success of the project. So I really like a lot of it is just like working really closely with my team members and not having music be this tactical, like that sounds cool. Let's just put this song in, like having some thought and intention around it.
I just want to pause here for a second to note this. Through the experience in doing what she does, Sam is really clear on what needs to be true to be successful in her work. She knows that the project from the beginning would need to be one where music is a major contributing factor to the success of the overall campaign or the overall strategy. Now, can she just pick a song for a commercial? Sure, she can. But does that enable her to do her best work? the type of work that's super valuable to a company, the type of work where she can really utilize her knowledge, experience, and talents? No. You can see here how the external value of the work that we can do can vary based on how well we align it with what we do best and what not everyone else in the world can do. It's about finding that sweet spot between what a company or client needs and what we do really well. Okay, let's get back to the conversation.
My former manager and colleague who I worked really closely with at Coke, he said, whether the client is right or wrong, he's right. Because for me as an agency person or as an outsider, it's like my project, whether I'm the one who made it not go well or I'm not the one who made it go, somebody else's fault or whatever, it's going to get put on me because I'm the agency person. I'm on the outside. I'm, not in those conversations internally at my client's company. And so that's again where like I need to identify projects where if I just like am not set up to win because I don't have enough time or money or information or a direct line of communication with the people that I need to get information from, then if the project doesn't go well, it's still going to fall on me. Like I want to be proud of every project that I do. So whether I'm right or wrong, I'm wrong.
Well, or if you agree, then you could both be right. But I think that makes sense in terms of now knowing when you're working with a client that, they are the decision maker. They are the most important opinion. They are the budget. They are everything in that sense. And their objectives are the things you have to center around. Knowing that all of those things are true, or you have to make them be true, knowing that you want to or are aligned with that type of client is that biggest filter that it sounds like you're making in terms of being able to be authentic in the work that you do. It's like, I won't work with clients who there's not a great chance of that alignment being there.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course I have, especially if I think it's a cool creative idea. I've taken on projects where I'm like, we really don't have, like, we really need a little bit more time, or like, I really need to have a conversation with this person, and I take on the projects and then they end up being, total headache. And I'm like, okay, I learned again, So yeah, I think so. It's like, closing a deal or having a client, decide to work with me is just the beginning of the relationship. So it's best, I think, if I get to speak about how I like to do things and they're like, yeah, let's do it that way, versus me trying to like convince somebody that they should work with me again, because that's just the beginning of the relationship, and we're making music. There's nothing really like, straightforward black and white about music. Like it can get to where we're just like people, it's tough for us to find the words to describe what it is we want something to sound like. And so, yeah, again, like alignment from the beginning, I think is key. And I am grateful all the time that I also have the, opportunity to be able to say no to projects that I think are not, I'm not going to be of the most service to them,
Yeah. Yeah. I liken what you do a little bit to, I worked for Procter & Gamble for a long time, and I was mostly on the retail facing side of the business. And so most people from an outside perspective would say, okay, the shampoo just ends up on the shelf at a certain price in a certain place. And they don't even think about, right, all of the intention and the strategy and the process and the data and the decision makers that go into that one thing being in that one place. And so it's like what you do, I think from an outsider perspective, sometimes people will be like, oh yeah, it's just a song that's a part of a commercial as an example. Yeah. But there's so much strategy to it and there's so much intention behind it. So I'm curious, like, what is that like for you thinking about this music for brands on this like big picture level?
This is like a consistent thing that I'm looking at. I say, like, back up your gut instincts with data and back up your data with gut instincts. Like music. And I just had this amazing conversation with a music producer friend yesterday. We had lunch and he's working on a book about music and the impact of music on our bodies and minds and stuff. And he brought up that how music is kind of like it enters into the wisdom of our bodies. If you think about,
Mm.
if I read a page of, copy in a book, you are not going to be able to tell me that page, like read that copy back to me. You could read it 10 times and you're never going to be able to tell me what that says. But you listen to a song 10 times and probably 10 years from now you can sing that song, right? So there's like something about music that just like enters the like wisdom of our bodies that our practical brains don't need to try and completely analyze and figure out. It's like it's just kind of part of who we are. Music, it just enters our bodies in this way. And so while we can for sure look at some data about who likes what types of music, and like if it's connecting to our target market and what's important to them, and kind of the ethos or personality and message and mission of the brand as well, we look at those kinds of things. I mean, a great example just is Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, and like Coca-Cola is very like inclusive and kind of democratic, and they work with a lot of independent musicians all over the world and people of different cultural backgrounds, and they compose original music as well and all that stuff because they're a very democratic brand. And then Pepsi is kind of more like in star spotlight, in the now, like a little bit more. So they work with like the hottest pop artists of the time. So that's just like a really basic kind of example of how a brand might think about music and how it would fit both with their consumers and like the mission or ethos of their brand. But yeah, I mean, again, also I rarely have a situation where maybe the brand and the creative agency and I are all listening to and considering 10 different tracks of music or something, and everybody wants something, like thinks something is wants a different track. That almost never happens because of the like je ne sais quoi, or like this like just kind of like primal thing that happens, this instinctual thing that happens with us in music. Is pretty clear almost always that maybe one or two tracks we're considering and everybody's on board with it, and we can't necessarily even describe it.
That's so interesting.
We're only presenting tracks that are going to work with the brand and the message of the campaign, and of course, but once we get to those like 10 tracks that we're presenting, it is really a gut instinct kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's just such an interesting thing to always look at.
Yeah. And to your point, there is intention and strategy and data or whatever that goes into the filtering of the things. But then once you kind of narrow it down, it's like the feeling, the emotion that it evokes in people, and they kind of can latch on to that.
Yeah. I think so.
That's cool. That's very cool. So, talk a little bit more about the transition that you made from working in an organization doing this type of work to doing it for yourself and forming your own agency.
Oh man. Yeah. I think when you're doing it on your own, it's all about me and what I know. Like there's no like hiding behind someone else's idea, or leaning on somebody else to make decisions, which is an amazing thing. It's super exciting to be able to craft things exactly the way that I want to. But it can also be like nerve-wracking. It's like, okay, well, I'm gonna prove to myself that I can do this or that I can't. And I had some huge wins early on in my career, in my having the agency. I had moved to Mexico and I was building my work here. And in my first few years of having the agency, I've been doing my own thing for about 7 years now, I think 6.5, 7 years. But in those first few years, I had some of the biggest music-led projects in Latin America for those years. And they were also sometimes like a total pain in the ass because I was still learning to speak up for myself, or to know when to like, just being organized, because I was just doing everything myself. Just like, I mean, it's a lot, reviewing contracts and knowing when to outsource things. And I would say across the board, like the biggest thing for me has been like energy management, managing my own, well, knowing when I do the best type, work different types of work. Like for me, mornings are my time when I can like focus and I can create something and I can produce work. That's my deep thinking time. And then in the afternoon, I need like more movement, and it's when I try and schedule all of my calls for the afternoons so that I can use the mornings for deep thinking, but also just managing like my own expectations. The first, well, maybe year 3 or so, I had these high expectations of myself, and I thought that my business should just go like this, versus like this. And I wasn't getting as much work as I thought I should. I wasn't making as much money as I thought I should. And I remember just being really hard on myself. And like, if it was between 9 and 6 on a Monday through Friday, I was sitting down and like making myself try and get work. And, so I'm really leaning into, and it's a constant practice, but unlearning that I need to be working 40 hours a week, because that's totally arbitrary. Like that doesn't make sense a lot of the time for most jobs now. Managing like if something is like not feeling good and I'm trying to produce results, but it's coming from this place of like lack or scarcity or like tension, it's like, okay, like go for a walk, go to the beach, something, like, because it's not working. Or what do I need to like adjust here to make this feel good? Because otherwise I'm just not going to produce the results that I want. So yeah, I mean, when you're working in a big corporation, I mean, you're on deadlines and timelines with so many other people. You have other people like looking at you all the time. And sometimes when you're like really stressed down or you just need some space, but people, it's a lot of people having to work together. But being on my own, I get to take that space where I need it. And yeah, again, like it's not so much about the number of hours I work. I think we're just living in this world where it's not this like linear, like, mechanical factory type, like work more hours and produce more widgets. Like we don't live in that kind of world anymore. And I think that is my nature, is to be more like that, to be able to tap into my like energies, and I can produce a lot in like an hour sometimes, and then I might need the rest of the day but I've had a, really productive hour. So I think that's more in my nature, and I've been able to really lean into that a lot more. But I'm still consistently like practicing like not feeling guilty if it's a Tuesday afternoon and I'm going to go play golf, and also, on Sunday, I was on a plane and I was reviewing a bunch of documents that I needed to for work, and I was working on Sunday, and that felt good too, So the flexibility.
Yeah, I should have talked to you maybe in the first year of my business, but I think I had to learn it for myself that when you're fully engaged in things, when you're creating, when you're building, when you're crafting something, it is very different than sitting in a meeting and listening or chiming in for a couple of minutes at a time. And going from corporate to entrepreneurship for me was that deconstruction of like 8 hours a day is very different in one of those scenarios versus another. And I need to kind of work with myself and with the times of days that I'm better suited for certain things, and not guilt myself into the number of hours that I work, because it's not going to be productive time. It's not going to be really effective.
Which is also not, when you think about like being in corporate, when you're in your corporate life, it's like, yeah, I mean, like you have lunch and then you stop by your friend's office and say hello. And then you spend some of your time just like organizing your things, and like, or you need to put information into systems to share it with so many other people you're working with, which we don't have to do as much now when we're working with ourselves. And just to, the idea of the 40-hour work week came from, I think it was part of the New Deal.
It was like Henry Ford and car factories.
It was Henry Ford. Yeah, right. And it was because people were, they had, well, and it was also child labor. They put age limits on having people because they wanted people to work fewer hours, like only 40 hours. And they wanted, children to not be able to work and stuff. So these were the standards they put. But again, that was a mechanical world in where the number of hours that the factory was running was the number of cars that were produced, right? And now we have email and, AI and all of these technologies, and it just, we can get so much done in a very short period of time. And I think, I mean, not to go too far off, but like there's all this conversation about artificial intelligence now. And I just think that they're going to be these tools that are going to have us work even fewer hours and continue to produce. I think there could be a time in the future where we work almost 100% remotely and the work week is maybe a 15-hour work week, but everybody's provided for, because we have all of these technologies and tools that help us to do the same amount of work in a much shorter period of time.
Yeah. And I do think there's this kind of conversation around separation of work and personal time and boundaries and when you turn your computer off and those types of things. But in the work that you do, I imagine it's similar. In the work that I do, I might be reading something on a Friday at like 8 o'clock and it sparks an idea that then like changes the whole dynamic of something that I was going to do. It's not during work hours. It might be a conversation I'm having with someone over a glass of wine, but those types of, it's this kind of like, for me, it's an integration of what I do, when I do it, how I'm doing things, that there isn't this black and white separation. And therefore, my work week never ends, but also like I have all the flexibility in the world to do what I need to do when I need to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think just for those of us who feel guilty for not working during, traditional work hours too, like acknowledging those moments, when you're, having a glass of wine with a friend on a Friday evening and an idea comes and you take out your phone and you write down this thing, like acknowledging to ourselves, like, oh yeah, that was really productive. Like that could move something forward. Like, I think that is helpful for me, at least in being, allowing myself to be a little more fluid. The one other thing I'll just mention, just being fluid with how we work and when we work, is like also, especially for women, like we have cycles, we have monthly cycles, and I am absolutely more like energetic and productive during certain periods of my, parts of my cycle. And then I'm much more reflective and calm and not as running around and motivated in other parts, and I've done a little bit of studying about that to be more conscious and aware of my natural rhythms. And that has been also really helpful. I attempt to not have, for instance, really important, business meetings, especially with new potential clients during certain periods of the month, because I know that I'm just going to not be as like engaged or warm or connected or thinking as sharply. And I think that's an amazing thing that we can harness as well. Women have a lot of amazing powers and like we should get to harness them.
I learned about some of this stuff from you. And then I also have done my own kind of deep dive on Ayurveda and the body's natural circadian rhythm clock and when we're most designed for working out versus social things versus deep thinking, which times of the day and how our digestion operates. And so I'm super into all of this stuff as well. And I just think it's one of those things where I don't think we need to be like super dogmatic about one way or another way. And we can experiment and test and try like all of these different things. There's so much wisdom that comes from our bodies, that comes from ancient cultures, that comes from all these different tools that we have available to us now that we can kind of play around with. And I get like in a corporate world, it's quite different. And maybe there's not as much flexibility, but there are little tweaks and things that we can be making no matter what our schedule looks like to kind of optimize within that. Okay, so let's talk about productivity and energy management. We are so attuned to tying productivity to effort and thinking about it as the output, when really it should be about impact. What Sam and I talked about here is something I've really been working to understand for myself, both in my own business, but also in general about how we see work in our society. In the old industrial days of work, more effort produced more output. More hours making the product equals more units of the product. And even though so much has changed, we are still so tied to this being how we see things today, even when we're not producing an actual good. It's starting to shift, but I think we still have a long way to go. If we can reframe productivity as being less about effort and producing stuff and more about maximizing the impact that results from what we do, it really does change a lot. In my world, I could do research on something for hours and come up with a great workshop idea. But I also could have one conversation with one person to come up with that same great workshop idea. And old ways of thinking might make me doubt the value of that idea because it was easy, or might cause me to guilt myself into thinking that I should have worked harder to come up with this new thing. Now, the second part of this is aligning our schedules with when we are best suited to do certain things. This is going to be different for everyone, and I'll talk about this more in the wrap up. As we get back to the conversation with Sam, we're going to dive into how she thinks about purpose in her work. You know, all of this stuff we're talking about is authenticity, right? It's like how we design our days, how we tap into like our own self-understanding of when our energy is better for different things, right? It's like when you work for yourself, you have kind of the ultimate flexibility there. But I also really love to talk about purpose and values alignment and the things that fulfill us and motivate us and fill us up. And you've centered your business around music. So what led you to music being such an intrinsic part of the work that you do in the world?
That's a good question. I have this like deep need. I don't know if it comes from like something in my childhood or like a past life or something, if you believe in that kind of thing. But I have this like deep need to express myself, like to be fully self-expressed is how I like to think about it. And even more so than that, maybe even more so than doing it for myself, like encouraging other people to, and I mean, that's authenticity too, right? It's like, it's being able to be your full self in every moment and be encouraged to be that person. I just have this, there's something about that I'm consistently drawn to. And I feel like I need to like fight for people to be able to be their own selves, you know, and fully express themselves. And so I think that's a big part of music, you know, it's like people are being very vulnerable with themselves to create music about their deepest, you know, stuff that they deal with and share it with the entire world. And I think that they should be compensated for that, you know, in many ways, or just that, you know, music is valuable to us. And so we should value music because it's valuable to us. And so that's kind of, I think there's just like a deep belief there. And for some reason, and maybe this has to do with my Enneagram type too, like I feel like I'm like a strong person and I'm not easily offended. And so I can like protect and provide for artists who are vulnerable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I would say that's kind of like that's a big piece of it. And also just, I was just curious about it. Like I grew up dancing. I was a dancer for 16 years. I started dancing when I was 3. And obviously music is a huge part of dance as well. I think that's where kind of my first, you know, love for music came from. But also my family members are all big music fans. You know, I was going to concerts with my parents when I was a kid. And so, yeah, I don't know. I didn't realize I was a person who like, I used to envy people who like always knew what they wanted to do with their life, you know, and then I realized many years later, once I was already working in music, that I was kind of one of those people. I didn't know exactly what it looked like what job I would have within the music business, but I did kind of know that I would do something there. So yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think it's really interesting because it is this kind of confluence of nature and nurture. It sounds like for you that like you grew up around music a lot. And then there's this kind of people who put their heart out into the world through their craft, like you can advocate for them, you know, in a way they might be kind of the underdog or vulnerable in the world, and you can kind of help them harness this amazing talent and craft that they have.
Yeah. Just to add to that, I think I've gotten so fortunate too, because when I think about the type of work, or like when I think about work, there are like 3 buckets that I look at. And I need, for every project that I work on, I need at least 2 of the 3 buckets filled. And I would say for any job I would take, like if I were going to, you know, be an employee again or something, I would need 2 of the 3 buckets one is that kind of like, is this something I believe in, that larger purpose or mission thing, which is what we were just talking about. The other is, do I like how I'm spending my time every day? Because there's a lot of things that maybe we really believe in and we want to get behind, but like how you'd be spending your time every day is like not of interest to you, or something that you're not good at naturally or something. And then the third would be feeling like I'm being compensated fairly, whether that's, money or, freedom of time or the ability to be creative or having my ideas heard or whatever, but feeling like I'm fairly compensated for the work that I'm doing. So I look at those three and I need at least two of those three.
Yeah. So what's important to you in that last bucket in terms of, because it almost feels like the compensation we can in our culture kind of tie directly to money. But to me, what you described is more about, do I feel like there's an equal value exchange here?
Yeah,
And that could
exactly.
be in the form of dollars, but it could be also in the form of a lot of other things, right? Freedom, autonomy, those types of
Yeah.
things. Like, how do you think about that for yourself?
Yeah. Well, am I being brought into this project as an expert and they want me to contribute to the solving of the problem? Are they going to listen to my ideas? Now, I'm an expert in music, but my clients are experts in their brand. So I'm not like bullheadish about like, you have to go with my way, because I know that they know a lot more about their brand and their business than I do. But, are they bringing me in as a consultative, expert in my field and want my opinion? That's something that's valuable, because a lot of the time, yeah, they just are like, we already know exactly what we want. Can you just like get it for us and like,
Mm-hmm.
make this
Yeah.
really easy for us? Is it a really cool creative idea? Like, is it a type of music that I'm going to love? And I'm like, ooh, I know the perfect composer for this, and this is going to be so fun. And, so that's a big piece of it. Is it a brand that I'm interested in helping? Like, is it something that I believe in? I've been in talks with a company who's kind of revolutionizing the healthcare insurance industry in the US, which for me is like, yeah, I want to support them, so that could be,
Yeah.
or things like that. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, creativity, it just interest in the project. Am I going to work with really cool people? Like if it's somebody who I just totally believe in and I'm then like looking for a project to work on with them, like, yeah. So there's lots of forms of energy. And I think we've just gotten we overly emphasize money, but there's so many other interesting forms of energy. And I think we're moving into a new chapter of humanity where people are willing to give up some of the money to have more freedom of time or health, or be able to travel more, remote work or things like that.
Yeah. And I think even the money conversation is very nuanced in the way that you kind of shared what is this range of how a company might bring you in when they're paying you commensurate with what they feel the value you're bringing is. So if someone's bringing you in from the start, you're part of this strategic conversation about how they connect with their consumers, they're going to pay you a very different amount of money than if they bring you in to say, we already know what we want. Can you just get the contracts together and get the rights to the
Yes.
music? Right. And so to
Yes.
your point, it's all of those things tied together that you said in those three buckets of like, you're going to be spending your time in a lot of paperwork. In this other place, you're not going to be making as much money and it's not going to be as aligned with what you like to do. And so money is intrinsic in that conversation, but it's like a symptom of a bigger conversation, or it's an outcome of a bigger conversation around
Yeah.
how much does this company value you or the work that you
Or
do.
value music. Yeah, or value music, And I
Yeah.
think this is a lot of the work that we have to do, and that I think a lot of us, music supervisors are doing is, not it's not for every brand that you should be, have a whole point of view on music and be thinking about it from the very inception and be spending, hundreds of thousands plus dollars on music. That's not for every brand necessarily. And so that is for each brand to decide, is like, where could music fit in here and how could it help? And I think what, a lot of this is kind of part of the role of the music supervisor, is to have businesses asking those questions to themselves and then putting the value on music if they see that it can be a valuable asset for them, but I think it's sometimes, yeah, we're just not seeing all of the ways that music can help support the brand and help grow the brand. And so, yeah, it isn't valued as much. And it's just bringing those conversations and having, asking the right questions to the right people within the organization who can make those decisions about the importance of music and the value of music and the monetary value of music.
Yeah, I love that. This is one place self-exploration is really important. How you think about the value exchange in your work. And of course, let me caveat this by saying we should get paid fairly for the work that we do and the value we deliver for a company. Full stop. This isn't about making excuses to take a salary that's below market value, or if you're an entrepreneur working for free in order to get exposure, because that does happen a lot. However, we do often look at salary or money in a kind of myopic way by just looking at the dollar figure and not considering the other factors. Let's say you make $250,000 a year. In most cases, people would think that's pretty great. They'd be really excited about that. But if you're expected to be available at all hours or work late nights or take calls on the weekends or rearrange your life at the company or client's beck and call, it's a really different story. When you really think about the dollars to hour breakdown or the cost to your health and well-being or your social life or your relationships, is that still a really great salary? The exchange of dollar for hours worked is just one element of this conversation. What else do you need and want, or what would you be okay trading off? For example, is less money and less responsibility okay if it comes with more flexibility and freedom? Now, when you're self-employed, this is often a much more broad conversation, and it is really personal and likely will change depending on the stage of your business that you're in. Sometimes taking a lower rate in order to build visibility with a very strategic set of potential clients might actually be something that you deem worthwhile. Again, we're not working for free for exposure to just anyone, but maybe taking a lower rate to get in front of people that could actually exponentially grow your business. Now, one tip I would offer up here is regardless of if you're self-employed or employed in an organization, pay attention to your emotions, specifically the feeling you get in your gut that can be sometimes identified as resentment. You may have to really slow down in order to access your emotions. And trust me, I am a recovering emotional compartmentalizer, and I'm actually really trying to regain this muscle, and it's taking me some work. Can I slow down long enough to tune into what I'm feeling? Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. But resentment is a kind of low-grade anger. It's kind of a combination of feeling this sense of unfairness happening and maybe some of a feeling of bitterness. It can often be an indicator that something is out of balance, like you're giving more than you're getting. And sometimes we won't know this until after we already agree to something and later feel resentful about it. But it's a great way that our system will signal to us that something is off. And then you get to reflect, and maybe you can identify a place where the scope of your client work has creeped too much, or where you're putting in way more hours than your boss probably realizes on the project that you volunteered for. And you could do something about it before it becomes an even bigger issue. And sure, maybe sometimes someone's purposefully taking advantage of you, but more often I believe that there may be a gap in communication or understanding, either of the expectations or what it's requiring of you to deliver on it. You could always have a conversation and bring this to light, and you may even be able to resolve it. But paying attention and noticing when you have those feelings of resentment is really kind of the first thing that you can do. Okay, so as we wrap up the conversation with Sam, let's hear from her on how she's growing. So as you think about your evolution as a person and the evolution of your business, the industries are always constantly changing very quickly. The technology is always changing very quickly. What is next for you and Parvin Music? How are you growing yourself? How are you growing your business?
Ooh, well, this comes at a perfect time. I've got some really interesting things going on this year. I think, yeah, the last couple of years for me have been really about kind of my personal work, my internal work, and I was traveling a lot and exploring the world, and I was doing work projects, and working kind of internally on getting to a new phase of how I want to speak about my company and stuff like that. But I wasn't really working on growth and, acquiring new clients and stuff. This year is a lot about exploring my own creativity, me as an artist, by executive producing. I want to produce talent in studio. So I do that for my work projects, but it's for, a branded project. So now I want to, be able to support especially kind of underrepresented talent. So women or people of different, cultural backgrounds, and help create the space in the recording studio or in the music creation process, and help create the space for them to feel supported and like find their own sounds. I think it can be a stressful process sometimes, and you hire in all of these people who want to also influence your music. So anyway, for me, it's working with artists in studio, which isn't necessarily a Parvin Music project, but I think it's going to really enrich what I do with my clients, when I'm feeling fully expressed creatively and stretching myself creatively. I'm also part of an organization where we're just building ourselves. It's in the Latin America, in the Spanish speaking world. We're called the Association of Music Supervision. We are about 50 music supervisors right now, and we're building some really amazing things, extraordinary people all over the world, really, who speak Spanish. And so there, I think we're going to do some projects ourselves internally, but also we're strengthening our ties with other people in the music industry, with record labels and publishers, and with clients even. So there's going to be some cool things there. Yeah. And then I am, as of like a week ago, kind of actively working on some new clients, bringing in new clients. And I have some kind of specifics about who I want those people to be, and really just like long-term, clients where I can be their music resource and help them build an entire, what do I want to say? Build their music capabilities.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of more of that long-term relationship versus project-based work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Great. Well, I'm excited to see where this next chapter leads you. And I know that
Me
you're always
too.
going to stay in tune and in touch with what is authentic to you in all of the ways that we talked about. So I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing your story with me.
Thank you for having me, Sandhya. You're doing some really amazing work, and it's exciting to think that, just as lots of shifts are happening, I think with people and the way that we work in general, that you're providing resources for people to kind of really consider all of these areas to look at as we're making shifts, as humanity. I would say we're making shifts in the way that we work. So appreciate it. And thanks for having me.
Thank you. Okay, in this episode, we covered a lot with Sam, and we really got into how she's tuned in to what she needs to be successful and how she can deliver her best work for her clients. Now, we talked about being visible and the things that we love so that opportunities can find us. And we also talked about how to think about the value you're getting back for the work that you are doing. Now, earlier in the episode, I mentioned how we can kind of reframe productivity, not as the effort that we're putting in, but as the impact of the work that we do. I've spoken a lot about how we can align our work with our talents and our values. And if you want to learn more about that topic or how you can do that, I would go back and check out episodes 14 and 18, where I talked about job crafting, which is really about how you can shape your work around your talents. And I would check out episodes 20 and 21. These were episodes all about the Enneagram and how you can identify your Enneagram type and how that really helps you recognize and leverage your unique talents. Now, the next thing that you can do is, how do we align our work with when we are best suited to do it, which is something that we talked about in this episode. So Sam and I mentioned a couple of different ways that we can restructure our days or our months. And if you want to explore this for yourself, I would start by asking yourself, what times of day work best for me to do different types of work? Things like independent thinking or research or creating something or meeting with people and having conversations. All of these different types of tasks require a very different energy from us. If we try to do deep thinking in the afternoon when our energy is better suited for connecting, that's where we're going to expend a lot of effort and energy and get less impact from that energy than if we had aligned that task with the time of day that works best for us. Now, I get it. If you work in an organization, you can't rearrange your whole day however you want. I totally understand that. But there might be some small tweaks that you can make. Like I hear many people talking about blocking out the first hour of their day for getting organized, or blocking one kind of 2 to 3 hour chunk during their week for deep thinking that's uninterrupted and held precious on their calendar. Or maybe there's a different way to go about producing the same results of something that you're working on that would require far less time, effort, or energy. Those are ways we can better manage our energy. It's the whole work smarter and not harder idea. But it should be based on what's best for you, not the former boss who did it and it worked for them. This is where the internal reflection and the exploration really comes in. And sometimes this requires some experimentation. Try some different practices, try to rearrange a couple of things in your day and see how it goes. Now, one system that I really love and I've implemented in my own life is Ayurveda. That's the ancient system of medicine that's been used in India for thousands of years, and it's all rooted in balance. How we balance all of the different elements, fire, water, air, earth within us. Now, according to Ayurveda, there are distinct times of the day that align best with our circadian rhythms that can help us kind of optimize how we use our energy. Without going into the whole dosha system, there are a couple of things that I've kind of taken away from thinking about the Ayurvedic calendar, the Ayurvedic clock. 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. is a great time to move your body or work out and get settled into your workday and do kind of some of those tactical housekeeping things. 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. is when our brain and our digestive system are firing most efficiently. So this is when you do your most strategic work and when you eat your biggest meal of the day. 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. is great for connecting or meeting with others. And then 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. is best for winding down. Your last meal of the day should be at 6 p.m., no later, and it should be your lightest meal of the day. And then bedtime at 10 p.m. There's a lot more to this kind of Ayurvedic clock system than I'm going to get into here, obviously, but I'll link some resources in the show notes in case you're curious about it and you want to check it out yourself. There's a podcast episode and a book by an Ayurvedic doctor that talks about this kind of schedule. Now, Sam mentioned if you're a female, how you can sync your work to your hormone fluctuations of the menstrual cycles that we all go through. I'm going to link a couple of resources here that kind of explain how our different weeks out of the month are really designed for different types of energy and activity and what's going on in our bodies at the time as we go through this cycle. And so one of the articles that I am going to link is from Forbes, in case there's anyone who's kind of a skeptic and wants a bigger name source. And I'll also link a podcast episode with author Alyssa Vitti, who has a book called In the Flow, and it's all about this topic. Sam recommends a book by Miranda Gray called The Optimized Woman, so we'll link that as well. And there's a ton of really cool information out there about the different needs that we have during the different weeks of the month, including when we need to eat more versus when we can eat less, or when we're better suited for high intensity workouts versus when we're better suited for stretching or lower intensity workouts. And also things like when we are better to be doing execution work, or when we're in connecting mode, or when we're better suited for creativity and creative projects. And then there's a week out of the month that's really all about reflection and revision and refreshing things. So check out these resources if you're interested in learning more about any of these different systems. But even if you aren't into that, it's something that I would encourage you to experiment with on your own. Just really tuning in to when things feel more effortless and when things feel more like a struggle. And do your best to align what you're doing with when you're most set up to maximize your impact with less effort.